Hey everyone, this is episode 6 of my mini-series Patching with Purpose. In this series, I'm going through the Moog Sound Studio and talking about ways that you can intentionally make patches based on the elements and principles of music. If you look in the description, you can see links to all the other videos where I emphasize melody, rhythm, harmony, and dynamics. This is the last one where I am emphasizing form. Now I'll say right off the bat, this one to me is the most challenging, especially working with the Moog Sound Studio or with Eurorack in general. Sometimes it's really hard to get some sort of structure or form to your music unless you're using like a sequencer or DAW or even just a keyboard to provide that for you. So there are of course many ways to do it. What I chose to do here was to use a sub-harmonicon to sort of imply a 3-chord chord progression. I also talk about different ways that you can patch to sort of create different segments in the arrangement. So I started off with a really basic melody. It's just an 8-step sequence in C Dorian on the mother. And then I go through some different ways and try to see how many different arrangements I could make by using all the different features and sounds of the 3 different instruments. If you think this is cool and you want to see a more detailed description, on my Patreon page, I post all of these patch diagrams with explanations and things like that. So there's a link in the description. Make sure to check it out. Either way, I hope that you like and subscribe. And with all that said, let's jump into the music. All right, so let's walk through this patch. We're gonna start with the sub-harmonicon. We're gonna be using it to create a chord progression. So first of all, I'm gonna have VCO1 tuned to C4. That's all the way down here at the bottom. And VCO2 is gonna be tuned to G4. Now, the sequencers don't really matter. Sequencer 2 we're gonna use for modulation. I'll get to that when we get into the patching points. But right now they're turned off. So we're just gonna have this kind of creating bass tones. So let me turn down everything and we can hear what it sounds like. So when we start, we're gonna have everything but sub-level 1 turned down. So sub-level 1 is the only thing that's sounding out. Because of the subdivisions of the oscillators, the sub-1 oscillator is the 4th subdivision down. So that's gonna give us actually an F at sub-2. So what we can do is by turning these knobs, we can actually make it go from the 1 to the 4, from the 1 to the 4. Now let's go back to the 1. And because this is tuned to G4, I'm sorry, this was the 3rd subdivision. This one's the 4th subdivision. So that's going to give us an F here. It's a perfect 4th down from the C. And this one, because it's turned to the 4th subdivision, will give us the same note, but just down a couple of octaves. So this is going to give us a G. So that's what we can use to essentially play a bass note, which will imply a chord progression over what's going on with the mother. So just to hear it with the simple sequence of the mother, let's turn that up. And we'll go back down. There's our G, and back down to C. So that's one way that we can add a form to this, is by giving it a simple chord progression that we can play along with, and then maybe have an interlude where we just hang on C or something like that. The next part of our arrangement with the sub-harmonicon is we can have the VCO1s come in just to add some extra textures there. So let's hit play again. So there you go. That's all that's going on in the subharmonicon. And as I mentioned before, it's a really active way of playing the form rather than just hitting play and just sort of jamming out or twisting knobs randomly. Let's hear it really quickly with the DFAM and everything going together. All right, let's move up to the mother and we'll talk about what's going on there and just some patching things that are kind of interesting. So with the mother, there's a couple of things that I was thinking of as I was making this. Number one, I wanted to keep the sequence relatively simple because I wanted the form to ring out. But I was thinking about how many different ways I could vary up the arrangement. So it's just a really simple 8-step sequence. It's in the Dorian mode and it has one simple ratchet on it. Let's just listen to the sequence all by itself. So it's not really that interesting on its own, but with the changes in chord progressions and things like that, it really shines out. So let's take a look at the patching points and how it connects to the subharmonicon. So the first thing is I'm taking the voice of sub 1 on oscillator 2, which is that G note, and I'm sticking it in the mix. Now, ultimately, after all the patching, it's gonna end up in the external audio. But what I wanted to do before that, I didn't wanna lose my noise, because if you plug into external audio, it automatically replaces the noise. So what I did is I took the noise out and I plugged it into mix 2. So now I can use this knob to control how much of sublevel 2 and how much of the noise mixes in when I turn this up. Now, in addition to that, I'm also modulating this knob using the triangle LFO. And finally, I'm taking the mix out and putting it into external audio. Now, if you remember when we were talking about the subharmonicon, that the sequences weren't affecting the pitch at all, but I am using sequencer 2 to modulate the LFO rate, which will make it kind of warble a little bit at certain steps in sequencer 2. And I think that makes a neat kind of rhythmical aspect when you start introducing noise with a short envelope, and it kind of flutters between that bass note and sort of like almost like a hi-hat sound. So let's listen to what that sounds like. So if I turn this all the way up, and so the tones you're hearing are actually the sub 1. The high pitch is the noise from the mother. And the reason you're hearing it kind of alternate between the two is because the LFO rate is modulating this knob. If I were to take out that triangle LFO, so it's not modulating it, you could go simply from that hi-hat kind of sound to the sub oscillator sound. But when we introduce the modulation, it'll go back and forth. And so then, because it's going with this LFO, by turning the VC mix, you're almost turning the probability of, if it's turned in this direction, then you'll hear more of the hi-hat sound. And if it's turned in this direction, you'll hear more of those, the subharmonicon sound. If you turn it all the way up, you get pretty much all hi-hat sound. If you turn it all the way down, you get pretty much all the subharmonicon sound. And you'll notice too that when I hit stop, the subharmonicon stops playing, and this stays at a steady level. But when I hit play, watch how it flutters a bit. And that's all because the sequencer 2 is changing the LFO rate, and that just adds some rhythmic variation to it. So what's really cool about this is you can sort of have that jump into the arrangement as well, where you can be playing the chord progression over the melody, and then you can cut the melody out and have this sort of hi-hat drum jam kind of go on for a little bit. Let's hear it without the melody. And now I'm going to introduce the melody back in. So that's just another way that you can build in a whole other section that you can play as you're going. And then lastly, with the DFAM, what I'm doing is having pitch, modulate noise level. I'm having velocity, modulate VCF decay. And let's just listen to what that sounds like. It's really just kind of to hold down the fort with the other two. I did actually tune these oscillators to C so that it would shine out with all of them. And you can turn up the VCA decay and kind of hear those tones. All right, I'm just going to play it out a little bit so we can kind of hear how it sounds and progresses with a few different conscious changes to the arrangement. So there you have it. I hope you liked this patch. As I said before, if you want to see the diagram, make sure to check out my Patreon page below. The next step for this is I'm going to wrap it all together, make final recordings of all of the patches, and put them on an EP on my Bandcamp page. That way you can kind of see how this all goes into like an album of sorts. All the patches are essentially like different songs. I've got a lot of videos planned over the next couple of months, so make sure you like and subscribe. But in that time, I'm gonna make sure to do some really great recordings of these patches. When I'm all finished, I'll post them all on YouTube and make sure to kind of talk about my thoughts in the recording process and just the album in general so you can hear it. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.